Every summer, millions of Americans gather to watch fireworks and celebrate the birth of their nation, operating under the assumption that the United States was born precisely on July 4, 1776. But the historical record shows something slightly different. The Second Continental Congress actually held the official vote to declare independence from Britain 2 days earlier, on July 2nd. That 1776 date becomes even more complicated when you consider that the Revolutionary War didn't actually end until 1783, and the U.S. Constitution didn't take full effect until 1789. In fact, historians can point to more than 15 separate events spread across decades that all have a legitimate claim to being the true Independence Day. To understand how this works, we have to look at statehood not as a single calendar date, but as a complex mechanism requiring 3 distinct stages: defiance, recognition, and governance. If a nation requires all 3 pillars to be structurally sound before it truly exists, we have to trace the timeline to find out which specific milestone actually birthed the United States. This map shows the original 13 American colonies along the Atlantic coast. Before any conflict began, this massive stretch of land was entirely under British rule. Establishing a new nation out of this territory required a unified will to rebel. That ideological defiance sparked in 1765, when colonists began organizing against British taxes imposed without their consent in Parliament. That political frustration eventually escalated into coordinated physical action in 1773. Groups like the Sons of Liberty marched to Boston Harbor, throwing an entire shipment of British tea into the ocean to protest the tax. The resulting British crackdown forced the colonies to organize a unified response, leading to the creation of the First Continental Congress in 1774. By April of 1775, British troops moved to disarm local militias, and that political defiance erupted into physical warfare, with the first shots of the American Revolution at Lexington and Concord. But while an armed rebellion is necessary to break away from an empire, domestic defiance carries no legal weight. A country cannot exist on the world stage without international validation. That brings us to the second requirement of statehood: foreign diplomatic recognition. The earliest sign of this came in November 1776, when an American ship sailed into a Dutch port and was greeted with a cannon salute, the very first foreign acknowledgement of the new American flag. Still, a polite salute isn't formal diplomacy. To earn that, the colonists had to prove they could actually win a war, a hurdle they cleared by forcing a major British surrender at Saratoga in October 1777. That specific victory was enough to convince European powers that the Americans were a viable military force, resulting in official recognition and crucial military support from France in March 1778. Yet, even with an organized army and powerful foreign allies, a breakaway nation remains incomplete until the opposing empire formally surrenders its authority. The final stage of independence relies on bureaucratic finality and a stable governing structure. The practical military threat against the colonists ended in October 1781, when French and American forces trapped the British Army at Yorktown, forcing a massive surrender that effectively halted the fighting. But the legal conclusion of the war took another 2 years. This is the Treaty of Paris, finalized in September 1783, which officially ended the conflict and documented Britain's recognition. Looking closely at the bottom of the page, you see the explicit, handwritten signatures of the negotiators, permanently binding both nations to peace. From there, the new nations still had to build a functional government, a process that wasn't completed until the U.S. Constitution was ratified in 1788 and implemented in 1789. This creates a historical paradox. July 4, 1776, doesn't align with the initial colonial defiance, the foreign diplomatic recognition, or the final establishment of the government. So why is it the defining date? The answer comes directly from the people who lived through it. Out of all the functional milestones they achieved, the Founding Fathers themselves chose to celebrate July 4th every year throughout the 8 long years of the Revolutionary War. Here is the original handwritten Declaration of Independence. The founders elevated this specific day because of the text on this parchment. The focus wasn't on the logistical details of separation, but rather the preamble, where the authors laid out their philosophical arguments. They explicitly asserted that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed with unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The United States celebrates July 4th because, ultimately, a nation is defined by the foundational ideals it pledges to uphold, rather than the military victories or legal treaties that simply allowed it to exist.